Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is DeaRonda Harrison to talk about the basics of grants and grant writing. DeaRonda, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me, Alex. Happy to be here and chat with you today.
So I'm hoping that you could please start us off by sharing your superhero origin story.
So I started over 10 years ago now. I'm helping a local nonprofit in my community. So it was the executive director at the nonprofit looking for a grant writer. Their senior grant writer was kind of transitioning out. And I just started helping them apply for some local money, county grants for the K-12 program, their K-12 education programming. And I was very new to grants, knew very minimal, took a few classes, took a few courses, and was there to assist them and just kind of grew from there. So as you work with some nonprofits, they know other organizations, they know other nonprofits that could use your help. And I just kind of immersed myself into grant writing, joined local membership organizations, and just grew from there.
Awesome. And what was like your main attraction to it? Like some people start with one thing and then they shift to another thing, right? But it sounds like,
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, you seem to have found your passion. Like what was it about grant writing
Yeah.
specifically that you found that, you really not only enjoy it, but you find it's very rewarding and you're able to, help others. And what was the elements that made it so interesting for you?
Yeah, I've always wanted to do meaningful work. I was working for federal government, and while great people learned a lot, the work was pretty mundane, and I just wanted to do more like meaningful work, making a difference. And that's what attracted me to grant writing. I honestly didn't know if I would like it. I didn't know if I wanted to continue doing it, and I was even kind of more part-time basis working for helping some nonprofits and churches with like their marketing and social media. So I wanted to kind of transition into more writing, but that's something that I enjoyed. Kind of came natural to me, and it just attracted me because I've always liked the work of nonprofits and what they were doing. Their work made a difference, and that's just really what attracted me to it. And I found that I really enjoyed it, and just continued from there.
Awesome. To start us off on the conversation about grant writing, I was wondering if you could share your perspective on the landscape. I've interviewed other people in the past about grant writing, and I'm always curious to know, if
Hmm.
people have the same perspective or some are more optimistic or pessimistic. Where do you see
Hmm.
high level the state of grant writing today?
Yeah, right now is an interesting time to say the least. It's much more competitive, especially with private grants. I mean, it was already competitive, but even more so with a lot of organizations who depended so heavily on public grants, shifting into private grants, your corporate foundations and your family foundation. So it's a lot more competitive. You have to be very strategic, thoughtful, innovative, all the things when going after these grant applications. And it's really making, grant writers level up their skills, so to speak. So the state of it right now is it's different, it's challenging, but I try to naturally be optimistic about everything. We're just shifting and pivoting. Like 2020 had its challenges, during the housing crisis had its challenges when all the different disaster programs in different parts of the nation having their challenges. So this is another challenging time. Just being strategic and understanding what do funders really want, and what are they interested in, and how can some of these organizations go into proposals as a partnership. So just being strategic about how you're approaching grants is the best way to move forward during these times, in my opinion. But the state of grants right now is just going to require you to be, a lot more innovative. And I think it's also separating the really good quality professionals from those that are just kind of like dabbling here and there, which is okay because you have to start somewhere. But if this is truly what you do, you're learning and you're leveling up and seeing how you can get success for your client.
So to you then, when you say competitive and it's been competitive in the past, this is just another curve in the river, so to speak, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not like you can start with grant writing. If you started with grant writing, let's say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even, and you had one formula that
Mhm.
worked for you, you could continue without change over those 20 years, 10 years, applying the same way of applying for grants. I get the impression you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that it's natural to have certain turns and twists along the way, and you just have to adapt to the current situation. And this is today is just one more turn in that thing.
Exactly.
Okay. What do you mean by strategic? If you could define that a little more when you say people need to be more strategic with their grant writing?
Yeah, I think how you're approaching some of these applications, a lot of times we're moving so fast. There's a lot of deadlines, especially if you are working at an organization or have a client who has a very robust grant program. You're doing a lot of copying and pasting, and it's really just timing. It's not that you're a bad grant writer. It's just like it's a lot of deadlines. You have to get a lot of things out the door. But being more strategic in these approaches to really make your application stand out, really highlighting how your organization may be one of many housing providers in the community, but how your work is different. What are you doing that's different? What population are you serving that's different? And really speaking to that. It's all about strategy again and highlighting, pulling the language of the focus area of the grant, of the foundation or the corporation. What is it that they really care about? And talking through that, so you have like your boilerplate language to kind of guide you, but you're really going to have to tailor your proposals during this time, which you had to do before, but even more so now. And again, thinking about strategy with partnerships, thinking about strategies with other organizations, I'm thinking about strategy with even other partners with how you're delivering your programming. All that and many other things goes into strategy, but that's just one way that I would approach it during this time.
They can be very challenging, though, right? To be innovative, to be more, I mean, in a more competitive landscape, to be more thoughtful. I had one guest on talking about how you really want to make sure you understand what the funder is looking for, making sure that their vision aligns with your vision, so to speak, speaking to that. And it's almost like you have to personalize your grant to a new level than you had to do in the past. Would you
I
agree,
agree.
disagree to something like that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The personalization is so important. The tailoring of the language is so key. So going back to what I was saying, like you have your boilerplate language, but having to tailor the language a lot for each proposal. And yes, it's time consuming, but that's where that other level that you have to kind of take your applications to stand out. My goal is to have my application be the number one, two, three of the dockets that they receive, that so that it can really stand out. So the reason we didn't get the grant is because the grant wasn't written well or didn't meet those points, so to speak, from the funder. It would be other reasons. So really having to try and doing your best to get on the radar of the funder and making your application stand out.
Yes, when you say stand out, is that what you mean by like the personalization, the thoughtfulness?
Mm-hmm.
Is there some kind of secret sauce or a mix that
Mm-hmm.
you ingredient that you add to the grant writing to make it more, I was gonna use the word pop because that's an old school web development term I used to use or people used to use in the past. But is there some kind of, is it like a maybe a certain edginess to it or
Mm-hmm.
emotional, turbulent type of thing? Like, is there any kind of ingredient that you can add to really make it stand out? And should you?
Yeah, I think what nonprofits aren't doing is because they just naturally do it, is not really highlighting their uniqueness or what they're doing very well, even just as consultants. How do we make ourselves stand out? A lot of times we have a unique skill set about ourselves, and we don't typically lean into that same thing for organizations. You may be the one of only, again, many housing providers in your community, but may serve people that have like substance abuse challenges in a unique way, or you specifically to tailor your services for that population. There may not be or very limited services for that population, or people who've been released from prison, or women that have been victims of domestic violence that are also mothers. Like, what is that unique thing that you're doing? Again, they're probably doing this and they're not really thinking about it because, again, this is what they do. This is what they do really well. But really leaning into that specificity, the uniqueness, that thing that you just do differently from other organizations. Again, you could be one of many after school programs, but you may serve children where English is their second language, and you have teachers who speak, multiple languages. So really leaning into that uniqueness. You may feel like you don't have it, but I guarantee you do. So figuring that out and letting that really pop, if you will, in your applications, really making that stand out in your application because you really want to stand out among the crowd.
I have the impression that a lot of nonprofits tend to be more humble than they should be. And
Yes,
therefore, it's
yes.
hard for them to promote themselves. It's in general hard, I think, for a lot of people to promote themselves because they want to keep a certain level of humility. Is that something you say, or you suggest you people, nonprofits turn off and say, listen, go all in. If you do think you're right thing, if you do think you're right for this grant, you should definitely go all in and don't be afraid to show your uniqueness and use language that really
Mhm.
supports that. Or like, is that something you normally advocate for as well?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said use that word humble. I've even told organizations you're too humble to admit this, but you're a leading housing provider in your agency, or you have one of the only food pantries, or one of the only clothing banks in the region, in the community, in your zip code. Definitely lead with that. That's okay. It's okay to say that. The humility is okay in a certain sense, but when you're applying for these applications, throw all that out the window, show them what you do really well, really lean into that, and really talk about we're one of the only people that do this thing, and that's okay. And funders will want to fund that because you're one of the only few people that are doing that thing that they care about, of course. So it needs to, of course, align with what they care about, but really talking about that, and that really will help you stand out and make your application much more compelling.
I can imagine that there's certain nonprofits out there who would love to have a dedicated grant writer on staff, but not every nonprofit has that ability. At some moment in time, there's a decision to be made to say, you know what, we need extra help. Let's go find. Is that the only option or the main option, or the most common option that nonprofits would have in that situation? Like, what do you do when you have limited resources? You're a small team, you don't have a dedicated grant writer. What can you do? Like, is going outside the only option, or are there other options available to you?
Yeah, my initial suggestion would be, hiring a grant writer, a fractional grant writer. So what you would pay a junior level person in-house on staff, you could typically get a fractional grant writer who is experienced at senior level experience, someone that you don't have to manage traditionally, in the sense that they can take your programming right, and without that ongoing consistent guidance. They're kind of being trained for a year and then they may stay. You look at the history or the statistics for fundraising staff at organizations, you may get 12 or 15 months from them. I'm gonna look into hiring a fractional, for what you would typically pay a junior level in-house person with much more experience, the background. And I always tell people, look for someone who has experience and background in the work that you're doing. So they have a history of winning grants in the type of programming that you serve. I mean, grant writers will argue we can write for anything, and we can, but they specialize in a specific type of work and program. They know the funders. They can pretty much rattle them off. Ask them those questions. Ask them who funds our work, or if they know who funds their work. Kind of see if they have a presence on social media. Is there someone that you trust that can vet them, or be a reference for them, or speak to their work? So just making sure that you definitely test them out, see how things go. Try trial periods. I know you want to just make sure everything is okay before you make that investment. So just be open to working with them in a different way. But if you really want someone in house, you're just gonna have to pay for it. And a junior level, just know it could take much more time to get you the results you need.
The word fractional is a relatively new term. I just want to make sure we have what would you call a fractional grant writer? What does that mean exactly?
So I say it's a senior level grant writer at the price of a junior level in-house person. So whatever the going rate typically in your market for a junior level, you could typically get a fractional grant writer, seasoned grant writer, a senior grant writer with the background experience. They're working at your organization as a consultant. So you all have developed a scope of work, the monthly fee for that, and you have agreed upon that work. And they're working on their own terms, and the scope that you all agreed upon, and that's how you're working with them in that type of model. So fractional is simply you're getting a senior level person for the fraction of the time and fraction of the cost that you would if you had to pay them in house. So typically, I always say think about it as a fraction of the cost for an in-house staff member.
I mean, it sounds great, but I mean, if it's a senior level, how can they be a fraction of the cost? Is it only because they're a fraction of the time as well?
Well, a fraction of the cost, I'm always comparing it to an in-house person.
Hmm.
So you're getting them for what you would pay an in-house staff person for a fraction of that cost, because that would be more.
Okay. And then in terms of qualifying that grant writer, you mentioned a couple of things, but I'm curious to know, like, besides you just mentioned references, which I think is a good idea, making sure you have references. is it a good idea to ask them like what their percentage of wins are there? Do they have? Yeah, let's start
Mhm.
there. Is that like what are the basic criteria that you would use to qualify a grant writer, and is percentage wins one of them?
Yeah, I know people like that question. It really doesn't mean anything. I'll be honest with you. People just make up a number. So I don't really tell people to use that or ask that. I always tell them to ask them about their writing experience and wins in like a specific type of organization or specific type of programming. So ask or lead with those type of questions more so than win rate.
And you mentioned a rate. You mentioned monthly. Is that a typical expectation for a fractional, or is it? Because I've seen scenarios where it's on the monthly rate, an hourly rate, or even a percentage of the grant that they're applying for. Any
Yeah,
particular perspective on which one you prefer and why?
Yeah, most of my clients are on a monthly retainer. So they have this set aside every single month. There's no surprises. We don't track hours. We don't come back and say we have additional hours. You need to come up with some additional money. Are we rolling over hours? It's just a set fee every single month, and they're budgeted for that, and they know what to expect. And we have a scope of work that we're working through, and they typically have a pretty robust grant program. So we're submitting grants multiple grants and handling the reporting for them every single month. And now, of course, there are grant writers that work on hourly. We don't do that. And then, of course, you have those that get paid out a percentage of the grant. We don't do that. I personally believe it's unethical because the grant funds are used for that specific project that is funding. So that's typically how we work with clients. That is how we work with them.
So, on a personal note, I work a lot with monthly rates when I'm in my
Okay.
Salesforce practice when I work with nonprofits. But the pushback I tend to get is, well, what happens if the client asks for, dozens of, in this case, grants to apply for grants in a single month? Like, how do you propose that either grant writers or nonprofits manage the workload? Like, if they're paying a monthly rate, the usual assumption is, well, it can, how many grants can they actually apply for in a month? Is it normal to have a limit to say I can only do one at a time, or a maximum of five in a particular month? Like any guardrails, basically, on
Yeah,
a monthly
yeah.
retainer.
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked that. So as the consultant, you have boundaries. So of course you're not going to be submitting 12 in a month. And honestly, I've never worked at an organization that had 12 projects or deliverables in a month. So that's typically not how grants work. There's typically on average 3 to 4, and there's some months where it's just super crazy. I have seen 5, 6, 7, and 8, but that is just unusual, and that's not a reoccurring instance. But on average, you're looking at about 3 or 4 deliverables per month, and that's for a robust grant program. That's an organization that's bringing in about $1 million in grants every year. So that's typically your average. I always get that question: what if they ask for more? Typically, grants aren't going to be more than that in a more robust grant program. And the organizations that I'm working with, they know that, they understand that. They're not asking me to do anything additional outside of that because honestly, just trying to stay on top of the current deliverables is enough. So we're just focused on that and working on that work. And again, all this is laid out in your scope of work before you sign the contract with your client. But a lot of my clients are grant knowledge aware. They understand how the process works, and I don't have to do a whole lot of educating them on that. So we just typically jump in to help them get their grants submitted.
So 3 to 4 a month. Sometimes it can go up to 5 to 8. What about the opposite
Mm-hmm.
direction? What happens if it's 0 or 1? Like, how does the nonprofit feel like they're still getting their money worth? Because if it's only 0 or 1 per month and they're still paying a monthly fee, there might be a certain friction or hesitation or nervousness about paying someone who's not really doing much for that particular month because there just isn't much to do. What do you normally recommend in those situations?
Yeah, again, my clients understand if there's 0 or 1 in a month, there's probably 8 in the next couple of months. So it kind of offsets itself. They're never saying they're concerned about me not submitting anything in a month. They know all the work that's done. In some other instances, there's times where there's the last minute proposals that may come down the pipeline. I'll jump in them for them. I don't tell them I'm not doing it for you. Again, given the circumstances or issues. So whenever there is a more quieter month, they don't have any hesitations and they don't feel like they shouldn't pay me or anything like that. So yeah, I have great clients, and A lot of that has to do with how you structure your scope of work and pricing. My pricing also attracts a high level, high caliber of clients, which I love.
Hey, Alex here. I want to take a brief moment and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, please consider sharing it with someone who would also benefit from its insights. It's these kinds of referrals that really help the show grow. You can also show your support by making a small donation. I don't do corporate sponsorships or product placements, so I rely on your support to keep the show going. You can visit my website, agentsofnonprofit.com, and click Support Us in the top menu. Thank you kindly. I know that there's some usual prep type work to do before applying for a grant. Is there anything particular you want to mention about that? Like, before a nonprofit applies for a grant, and of course, that's a very broad question because maybe grants have different requirements. But is there a general, what are the usual suspects when, or what to do when prepping for a grant?
Yes, great question. The typical grant application, and I have a grant checklist, Alex, I can share with you that you can share with your audience, whether it's a typical attachments that they'll ask for. So they may ask a list for your senior staff bios. Of course, they'll ask for your 501c3 letter. They'll ask for your organizational chart, organizational budget, audits, financial statements, prior year financial statements, a list of all your different programming and deliverables, board of directors list. So there's a number of things to kind of, what I say, get grant ready. And then also when I start with clients, I have this very exhaustive list of all these different attachments that could be asked in grant applications. And we collect all of that information. That's it is a part of our onboarding so that when we start applying, we have everything we need. We can get these applications submitted and not have to keep going back and forth asking for everything. So that's a great way to see and collect a lot of the items that are being requested in grant applications.
I'm going to show my inexperience here for a second. I've never applied for a grant myself. Is it typical that at the bottom of a grant, they might the funder might ask for anything? Do you have any additional comments or feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Is there? I imagine that's a great place for the nonprofit to really stand out because it's asking for additional information that they didn't initially ask for. Do you have any tips on is that the place where the uniqueness, where using the language and tailoring the wording, that's the opportunity to use it? Or is there another element or another thing that you can recommend or do recommend when adding or replying to that particular question?
Yeah, that's good question. You sound like you do grants because they do that sometimes. They'll ask, you can leave additional comments in this section. I haven't seen that lately, but they used to do that pretty often. So if anyone's done any grants, you know about the portals, very limited characters, very limited word count to get your point across. But I always like to use that section to tell a story, give a client testimonial. All of my clients are human service, this nonprofit, so we can use that time to tell a client testimonial. Keeping the information or keeping the client, anonymous. But that's a great space to use for that. And if you've infused the client story in another part of your grant application, sharing other data, statistics, things that you have in your annual report that you may not have addressed in the application. So I always tell people, don't leave that section blank. You have it, use it. So definitely it's a great place to share client stories.
Let's assume a happy path and the nonprofit receives the grant. Are there any particular steps, early steps, let's call it, that they should do once they've initially accepted and received that grant?
Yeah, when you get the grant, you're going to get a grant agreement. It's going to tell you how to the actual amount, because it's not necessarily what you asked for in the proposal. You could ask for 50 and they could have awarded you 35. So read your grant agreement, see what those funds are for. This is typically finance team, of course, but you're working closely with them and to see how to apply those funds, which is very important. And then the grant agreement will lay out the reporting. So you can add the reporting to your calendar. For ABC Foundation, we have to send them a report 1 year. We always say a year from the grant award, but the grant agreement will actually tell you that date when that report is due and adding that to your calendar. And then sometimes they'll lay out what they want in that report as well. So that's the most important thing, looking at the actual amount and what it's for, so those funds can be applied to that, and then the reporting elements of the grant.
So AI has had a tremendous impact on the world, and especially in nonprofits, but all over the world. And I've had people mention that it has definitely made a big impact in grant writing, that it can either write it for you, at least at first draft, or fill out that form, as you mentioned. What have you seen or what impacts have you seen with AI and grant writing? Like, is it making grant writers less valuable or more valuable? Do you see difference with grant writers that use AI versus ones that don't? At some point, where does AI fit in grant writing?
Yeah, I think eventually, if you're a grant writer and not using AI, you won't be around too much longer. So you're going to have to incorporate it in some sense because it's going to, I think, those that are using it are going to be able to, move faster, move quicker, get applications done in a much faster rate and take on more clients. So the grant writing, what the AI produces for grant writers is just say a LOI, which is a letter of intent. Typically, some funders will ask you to submit that before you even do a full application. So you can ask ChatGPT to create an LOI with your custom prompts in there. But because you're a grant professional, you know what a good LOI looks like. Like a non-grant writer or non-grant professional could produce a letter of intent or an intent to apply, but they don't know the product that was produced is quality or compelling and all the different elements of a good proposal. So that's why I say, as a grant professional, definitely using AI. I'm not even using it to the level or maximum or incorporating custom GPTs yet or anything like that. But definitely, I think if at the point if you're going to get to, because that's where we're headed, you're going to have to incorporate it in some capacity in your work. And I know there's some concerns about what about clients and how they feel about putting their information in there, any, of course, identifiable information or sensitive information, not including it in there. But it's just like, this is where we're headed. So your clients are going to just have to accept it or not, move forward. So it's all the rave right now, but it is essentially going to be how we work and how we move forward. So I'm embracing it. I have no quarrels about it. And of course, still learning how to utilize it and maximize it to the fullest potential.
So did I understand correctly that you said that there is a legitimate concern about sharing sensitive information with a
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT style, but
Mm-hmm.
the value is worth it. What you're getting out of it is worth sharing it. Like it's something you should be concerned about, and if you can avoid, of course, sharing information you don't have to, then don't. But the idea is that it's just so much easier, so much more powerful, so much better to use in AI overall. Even
Mm-hmm.
though there are certain drawbacks that, if you don't use it, you're going to be left out or not as efficient, or maybe you can't apply for as
Mm-hmm.
many. Like, is that the impression that I'm getting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely feeling like that. It's like the internet. Like we thought
Mm.
that was crazy when it first came out. If you're not using the internet today, I mean, pretty much, where are you? How are you operating? That's how I feel the future of AI is going to be as well. So it's just kind of going to have to be one of those things that you embrace. So it's just like going back to my example earlier with an LOI. It may take me a couple of hours to do it. If I build my custom GPTs in ChatGPT to do that for me, it can produce something in less than 10 minutes. So it's going to be something that we can leverage and use and utilize it to the maximum value that we can, because it's making work more efficient.
A lot of people forget that emails are actually quite insecure. I remember years ago when it first came out, people said, listen, you should treat emails as if you're sending a postcard in the mail, in that sense that anybody could read it. Not anybody, but people with enough skill in this case could read it. And we just normalize that, or you don't think about this today. We send emails to each other with all kinds of personal information in it where we may want to be more cautious. We just normalize it and saying, this is the state of the world, and I'm accepting whatever outcome because of the benefits I receive by sending that email. So it sounds like AI is just another step in that. It's yes, we have to, we'll get to a point where it will be normalized. And we understand that we are giving up something, but we're also receiving much more as a result.
Exactly. It's a great example. I agree. Yeah.
So given that, you mentioned about the future, like if you had a crystal ball, where do you see grant writing going in the future? Is it going to be just completely swallowed by AI? And one master grant writer could write grants thousands of times for across multiple organizations, and you'll need one, or is it like what does that landscape look like? Is it still the need for the human element, and if so, how?
Yeah, I think the human element is a professional grant writer that knows what a good product looks like. So if you're just beginning in grants, you're that's going to take time. You're going to have to learn, and you'll see, and you just get better over time. Like even me, I started with 2014. I'd say around 2018, 19 is when I actually got what I say really good at it. So it just takes time, and the human element of that is when you do use AI to produce the product, you'll know that that product is good. You have to sign off on what you're going to submit as a grant professional, as a human. So that's where you would come into that, in grant writing. I don't think it can replace us 100% because there is that human element of it. And then there's still, um, of course, some things that AI produces it just isn't quality or just doesn't look good. So you need a human to review that to see what it looks see what looks good, see if it's quality, if it's something that should be submitted on behalf of an organization. So I think for now we're still needed.
And then if you had a superpower, because I love that superhero type theme to the show, if you had a superpower that could change anything in the grant making world, what would that be?
I would like to see grant makers understand the work that's involved in producing a quality grant proposal. A lot of times they'll say, oh, it's just a quick proposal. It should only take you 30 or 45 minutes. And that's never the case. So them understanding really what that process is and what that looks like. And I would love to see, like, I don't know, a database where organizations who may not have the resources, like going to your point earlier about hiring, a grant writer, and may have a small team where they could go in and submit their templated quality boilerplate letter of intent that really sells their programs and services, and they could get a return or a decision within 24 hours. They'll know whether they were awarded or not. So something that helps them improve that process, make the process much simpler. That would be the superpower that I would definitely deploy, is having a repository, if you will, of where organizations can go in and submit their proposals, and they can get a decision pretty quickly so they know whether to move forward or not. So that would be beautiful, the perfect world. That would be nice. But we know we're just not there right now.
DeaRonda, that's been great. Thank you. A lot of valuable information today. I was wondering if people have additional questions, how can they reach out to you for follow-up questions?
Yeah, they can definitely and message me on there, or I'm happy to share my email with you to share with your audience. They can connect with me at junefirstfirm.com. And my email is DeaRonda@junefirstfirm.com. That's JUNEFIRSTFIRM.com.
Cool. And we'll put all the links in there, plus the checklist that you mentioned earlier in the show notes. DeaRonda, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thank you, Alex. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.